Hi, and welcome to Subtractive Synthesis 101 with Sonic Academy. My name's Jeff Heed, and some of you might know me as Bluffmunkey, and this course is designed as an introduction into subtractive synthesis. Now, during the course, we're going to look at the components that make up most subtractive synths. We're also going to look at what each one of them does and how they interact with each other. And then we're also going to look at signal flow and how a lot of synths are going to give you some kind of control over where your signal's going to. Now, most of the time I'm going to be using Sonic Academy Anna, and I'll also be using Serum by a company called Exfer, and possibly Electra 2, and maybe a couple of other synths as well. Mainly because some of these other synths, although they're not strictly subtractive synths, they have kind of graphical feedback on the oscillators and the LFOs, and on the filters as well, so it's a lot easier to see what's going on. So the first question is, what is subtractive synthesis? Well, I read something interesting quite recently that according to legend, Michelangelo was asked how he created the statue of David out of solid rock, and his response was that he simply cut away the parts that didn't look like David. And that's kind of what we're doing with subtractive synthesis. You start off with a raw oscillator and you use filters to cut away part of the sound and shape it into something different. Another way you could think about this is your own voice, the human voice, where your vocal cords act like an oscillator. They go backwards and forwards to create pitch at various speeds, and your throat and your mouth will act like filters, so you can make oo, ah and e sounds and all the other sounds you can make with your voice. Okay, so a little bit of history. Subtractive synthesis started mainly in the 60s and the 70s using modular synths. And what these things were great big banks of wires and cables and holes to connect things together. And it looked like somebody was using one of the old-fashioned telephone exchanges. But all they really were, they were the different components of synths hooked up with wires, and you patched an oscillator to a filter, and you used a modulator to make changes in other ways. But they were very, very complicated. They took a long time to create a patch, and you couldn't save presets on them because they were using these cables, and they were immensely expensive and big and heavy. So what happened is in the 70s and the 80s, companies like Roland created the Juno series of analog polysynths, and there were other synths like the Prophet 5 and the Minimoog, which was monophonic. And these were much simpler, but they were what we call a fixed architecture, so you couldn't alter the way that the signal flow is happening that much. You could a little bit, but not that much. But they were a lot cheaper, a lot easier to use, a lot easier to program, and on some of them you could save patches as well. Now, all these synths, what they had in common was that they used electrical components on a circuit board to create audio signals, and these are what we call analog synths. And moving forward to the mid-90s, I think it was 1995, a company called Clavier launched something called a Nord lead. And this was the first virtual analog synth on the market. And the difference here is that the synthesizer, or the sound, was created using DSP code instead of electrical components. Now, the advantages here were that you could have far more polyphony than you could with analog synths. And you could also save presets very easily. This laid the foundation to the plug-in synths that we're using today. Because your computer, it acts as the host to DSP or code, and that allows you to have plugins and synths and effects processors on your computer. So what we'll do is we'll start off looking at the architecture or the signal flow of a synth to give you a rough idea of how this flows through the synth. So you've got that in mind before we start looking at the individual components. So we'll look at that in the next video. I'll see you there.